You're watching What the JavaScript, and let's continue building our application. First of all, I'm going to just get rid of these couple of sidebars from here because we'll only be needing one. And I'll just wrap this entire thing in a div where I'll be adding some more components. Cool. So now we're going to create a column component where we can show the user activity. And we'll be fetching all the users' start repositories and displaying them as a column. So first of all, let's dive into a GraphQL query, which we'll use here. So right now we were using this viewer query to fetch the viewer information, which we're displaying on the sidebar on the left hand side. Now let's write the user query. So I'll just remove this from here and write the user. So for the user, I need the login. So for now, I'll just pass my login information. And now let's fetch the information. So let's say ID, and this should be a string. Run the query. Cool, so I'm able to fetch the ID. We'll also need some more information over here, and we'll be mainly displaying the start repositories. So let's get that information. We can also fetch the user's avatar URL and the start repositories. Cool, so start repositories looks like we need to pass some parameters to each start repositories. We'll just write this a bit later. Here I'll just see what's available, edges and nodes. So we can use edges, and inside the edges we can request a node. Inside this node we'll have access to all the information that we'll be needing. So let's just fetch the ID and let's just run this query. Cool, so looks like we have an error here which is saying that it's missing pagination boundaries because we haven't provided any first or last value to a start repositories. Since we are requesting a number of start repositories, this start repositories parameter expects us to pass some form of pagination factor to it, which it can utilize, and we can request the latest repositories. So let's just fetch the last 6 repositories. Run the query again. Cool, so now we're able to fetch the last start repositories for me, and we'll just fetch some more information here. Let's also fetch the created at viewer has start, which should tell us whether the logged in user has started this repository or not. We'll also fetch name with owner, and let's also fetch the owner's avatar URL so that we can display it. We can also link to this repositories, so let's also fetch the URL, and we can also fetch the repository topics. It also expects a pagination factor that it can utilize, so let's just fetch the first 4. So this argument should fetch us the latest 4 repository topics. And here also let's go into edges. Inside edges we'll find the node, and inside the node we'll have some things. We'll fetch the ID, and let's fetch the topic as well. Inside the topic we can fetch the ID and the name of the topic. So let's run this query. Cool, so looks like we're able to fetch all the required information that we can use. So these are the latest start repositories for my user, and we can utilize this information to render our column component. You might also be wondering the difference between these edges and node. So for this I'll link to an article which explains this more clearly, but for now you can visualize this as a node as this circle which stores the data, and these edges are the lines that connects the data to another node. So if you scroll down here, you can visualize it this way, such that the user as a node has a connection to the post as a liked post. So this article will explain to you in more depth the difference between edges and nodes and why we use them in graphs. Coming back to the query, let's make this login information as a variable. So for this, I can go into the query and make it accept a user parameter, which should be a string, and it should be required. And now on the login, I can pass that same variable. Inside my variables, I'll just pass a sample variable to see if it's working. So I move the handle here and run the query again. Cool. So we are able to use the query right now. Now let's build up some presentational components that we might be needing. So I'll just go ahead and create here, let's say, a column component which will hold our query for us. And here I'm just going to paste in the query that we just created. So let's say const get user activity is equal to GQL, and over here let's just paste this query. Cool. We will also need to import some things. For example, we'll be needing React, and this GQL we can import as well. I just added some imports that we'll be using. So I've imported the GQL tag from Apollo Boost, the query component, style components styled, and now I'll just create some style component that we'll use to wrap our column component to give some basic styling. So here styled, and I'll pass in a section and just add some basic styles. Just copying some styles that I have, and now just create a column component. Const column is equal to, let's keep it a functional component, and here let's just render something. So I'll just say div column, and now I'm just going to export this as a default export. Cool. Now let's use this column component in our app to render beside the sidebar. So I'm just going to import it from my components. Import column from components dot slash components slash column, and here we can just render it column. Cool. So column is rendering. Let's just add some styling to the app. So I'm just going to copy in some styles that I have. Cool. So I made this a grid layout so that the column can render beside each other. So this will render a ATPX grid as the first column, and after that it will render a auto fit grid which will have a max value of 300 pixel. Now let's just render one more column here. Cool. And now we're going to just use this query that we just created in the GraphQL client. So I'm just going to change this div with query, which is coming from React Apollo, and over here I'll just pass the query value as the get user activity, which is our query right here. And we also need the variable user, so let's also just pass a user value here. So I'll just pass a variables, it's an object user, and I'll just pass my user for now. Hit save, and now we can just get all this information that we're getting from here. So this will be available to us data error, and let's just also get the loading. Now I'll just render some things from here. So just put everything in a fragment. Now I'll just say if we're getting loading, then let's just display loading. And if we're getting some error, we'll just stringify it and display it. So JSON dot stringify, and I'll just stringify this error. Good. We can also see if we are getting the data. So let's say if we're getting the data and we're getting the data user, we can just stringify the result for now. So div json.stringify, and I'll just pass in my data.user here for now. Hit save, go back to my React application. Cool, so we're getting a whole bunch of data here. And now we can also wrap this entire column in a column wrapper. So I'm just going to wrap this in column wrapper, hit save. Cool, so we have got some styling working. So we are displaying all the user information that we have fetched from here, and we can also just make this user as a prop. So let's go ahead and do that. In a wrap component, I'll just pass the user, the first user as myself, and let's take the second user as my friend MetaGrover. And inside the column, we can use this prop that we got from here, user, and we'll just pass that user from here. Cool, so now this user prop will be passed as a variable to this query. So hit save. Cool, we are able to get all the information. So this is for the first user, this for the second user, and this way we can extend this logic. Now we've got all the data, so let's improve the UI for this application. We'll need a couple of more presentational components. So we'll just render all this information as a card layout. So I'm just going to go in my components and create a card.js, which will be holding my style component for the card. So I'll just paste in the styles for this. So I'm just going to get some styles for the card. Cool, we got that here, and I'm just going to import styled from style components, and I will just export this card. Cool, let's also create one more style components called tag to display the repo topics. So I'll just go ahead and get the styles for this. Got it here. We'll also need the styled export from style components. So import styled from style components, and I'll export this from here. Cool. So these components should help us improve the UI a bit more. We can also add some styling to this sidebar that we created. So I'll just go into my sidebar and just add some more styles to the sidebar. So I'll go to this and add some styles. Cool, we've got a sidebar functioning. The application is coming into place. Now let's just get the cards working. So I'll go into my column, and let's say we take all this information that we're getting from the user and pass that to a different presentational component that we can use to render the data. So I'm just going to create a repo card component here, repocard.js, and just add some more styles to this. I've added the basic component for repo card. I'll walk you through it. So we are just doing imports for React and style components macro. We're importing the components that we created for presentational layer, avatar, card, and tag. We're also importing a couple of SVGs, star SVG and a star SVG field, which I'm going to just create now in a assets directory. So I'll just go here, create a assets directory, and here I'll just create a star.svg and a star-field.svg. So I'll just copy in the styles for this, star field svg, And now I'm just going to add the star.svg. Cool. So the assets are pasted. Now coming back to the repo cart, we will pick the information of the data and we'll just find out if the viewer has started, and accordingly we'll display the appropriate star. Let's look into the GraphQL Explorer and the data that we have. So we are looking at the node of the star repositories. Star repositories will have edges, and inside the edges we're looking at the particular node. So this repo cart should be able to handle rendering this node data for us. And inside the card we'll render the starred SVGs, and we'll also render the avatar URL for the user, and we'll display the name with owner. We'll also display the repository topics. We'll just map over the edges. If we just scroll down here, we have the repository topics over here, which isn't present for this repository, but it would be present for some repositories. So that's why we are adding some conditional checks. If I just do this, we'll be checking for the length of the edges, and if they are present, we'll just map over the repository topics. So repository topics will have an edges property, and inside that there will be a node, and a node has a topic ID which will pass as a key, and a topic name that will pass to render this data. So I'm just going to hit save. Cool. Now we just need to make use of this component to display the data. So I'll just do an export for this component, export default repo card. And now let's just make use of this component. So coming back to the column component, I'll go here and import the repo card. So import repo card from /repo card and pass in the data which we're just rendering. I'm just going to remove this div from here and just render a fragment here for now. And now let's just get our data to render here. First, coming back to the application, we can show the the user's avatar and their name here. So I'll just render a div, and inside this div I can just render an avatar which was auto imported from /avatar, and here I can just pass in the src my data.user. And let's look into the GraphQL client. We have inside the user we have the avatar URL, so I'm just going to pass here the avatar URL and a width of 25. Cool. We can also display the user's name. It will be accessible to us as a user prop which we are getting from the parent component. So let's just display it here, and I'm just going to paste in some styles. Hit save. Let's look into the application. Cool, we have got some things working and it's not looking exactly right, but let's do the stylings. We can add a height of 25. Cool, so it's looking better. I'll just add some more styles here. CSS, give it a margin left of 12. Cool, looking better. And now just render the repo cards beneath the user. So coming out from this div, let's just look into the GraphQL client again, and over here inside the user we are looking at the start repositories, inside which we are looking at edges, and the data will be available to us inside a node. So let's just get the data rolling. So I'll say data.user.start repositories dot edges dot map. So this should give us a node, and using this node we should be able to render a repo card. So repo card, we can pass the data as node and also give it a key of node.id. Give that a save, come back to the application, and we have our cards rendering. This is looking good. And here's our second column as well. So first column for myself and second for my friend MetaGrover. So right now it's showing us these yellow stars for the repositories that I have already starred, and it shows a white star for the repositories that aren't starred by me yet. So coming forward, we will look into mutations and how we can start these repositories from the client, and we'll also look into pagination. So watch out for that and stay tuned for the next updates.